Welcome to NBA Jam!
NBA Jam is, to me, unquestionably the greatest basketball game ever made. More than that, it's the platonic ideal of what sports games should be. Instead of trying to perfectly simulate the games we see on TV, NBA Jam succeeds by capturing the feelings evoked by watching these games on TV. Did NBA players actually dunk like this? Of course not. But when somebody like Michael Jordan put defenders on a poster, it sure felt like it. So in this game, he really could. Well, not MJ himself. He's not in this game because of a beef with the players union. That's a topic for a whole other video. But you get the point. The most iconic way in which NBA Jam captures these feelings is through its on-fire mechanic. Score 3 baskets in a row with the same player and the ball will turn into an orb of fire and burn the net. That player is now on fire, basically making him basketball god. He gets infinite turbo and turns into a sharpshooter to put Steph Curry to shame. Pull up with 2 defenders in your face? Easy money. Pull up from the logo? That's cash. Let one fly while running full speed away from the basket? Swish. NBA Jam's on-fire mechanic is exaggerated because all of NBA Jam is exaggerated. But it is capturing something that everybody who has watched basketball has experienced one way or another. The hot shooter. The player who just can't miss, no matter how tightly they're defended or how absurdly difficult the shot gets. I'm a University of Wisconsin basketball fan. Go Badgers. And I will never forget the way Steph Curry tore us apart when he was putting the entire Davidson basketball program on his back en route to the Elite Eight. When watching those on fire clips, you might have thought something like, hey, that looks kinda unfair. I agree. It definitely is. You know what else felt unfair? Being a fan of a college basketball team that had to defend Steph Curry. In that sense, On Fire is a brilliant reflection of the hot hand. The fire mechanic in NBA Jam is one of the most overpowered mechanics I think I've ever seen in a sports game. It might be one of the most overpowered I've ever seen in a video game, period. You basically become basketball Jesus until the opponents manage to score a basket, or until you score 4 more times. The most obvious benefit is the infinite turbo meter. Turbo is the lifeblood of NBA Jam. It makes players go about twice as fast. It's required to dunk. It's required for the game's most powerful defensive move, shoving the opponent to the ground. Double tapping the turbo button while holding the ball lets you fight them off. It even makes your passes faster. The only reason not to just hold the turbo button down all the time is that it drains pretty quickly, and if you don't manage it, you can get caught in situations where you don't have enough turbo to outrun the defense, go for a steal with a shove, or finish a fast break with a dunk. On Fire lets you just do all of that, whenever you want. It also makes your player way better at basketball. Defensive turnstiles can become block machines. Guys with lead feet can jump out of the gym. And guys like Dikembe Mutombo, who missed both of the 3-pointers he attempted across his 18-year NBA career, can do this.
Wild shot!
But without the other benefit of On Fire, it still wouldn't be that overpowered. On Fire is overpowered because it lets you do this. NBA Jam doesn't have fouls. It doesn't have out of bounds. It doesn't have any game stoppages except for one, goaltending. And when you're on fire, even that rule doesn't apply to you. Quick correction, I forgot about shot clock violations, but those almost never happen. Once you're on fire, the optimal defensive strategy is just to run under the rim. There's no 3-second violation here, and just sit there until you can catch any shot. And because On Fire improves a player's defensive abilities, there's a pretty good chance you'll even be able to just rip a dunk attempt out of the opponent's hands. NBA Jam takes the fascinating approach of representing the player with the hot hand, the player on a streak so hot it feels like he's breaking the rules, by literally letting players on a hot streak break the rules. To me, it's the perfect example of what makes NBA Jam so good at evoking the feelings we get when we watch sports on TV, even if it's nowhere close to representing the reality of NBA basketball. The hot hand is something that feels deeply real to pretty much every athlete or sports fan. But despite that, it has been a subject of heated debate between psychologists, statisticians, and basketball fans, and even players and coaches, for years now. It all goes back to a study published in 1985 by Thomas Gilovich, Robert Vallone, and Amos Tversky, titled The Hot Hand in Basketball, on the misperception of random sequences. The study is described pretty concisely in Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Amos and his students Tom Gilovich and Robert Vallone caused a stir with their study of misperceptions of randomness in basketball. The fact that players occasionally acquire a hot hand is generally accepted by players, coaches, and fans. The inference is irresistible. A player sinks 3 or 4 baskets in a row, and you cannot help forming the causal judgment that this player is now hot, with a temporarily increased propensity to score. Players on both teams adapt to this judgment. Teammates are more likely to pass to the hot scorer, and the defense is more likely to double team. Analysis of thousands of sequences of shots led to a disappointing conclusion. There is no such thing as a hot hand in professional basketball, either in shooting from the field or scoring from the foul line. Of course, some players are more accurate than others, but the sequence of successes and missed shots satisfies all tests of randomness. The hot hand is a massive and widespread cognitive illusion. Wow, that's a pretty serious find. Everybody must have just accepted the science and changed their ways to acknowledge that the hot hand isn't real, right? Kahneman continues. The public reaction to this research is part of the story. The finding was picked up by the press because of its surprising conclusion, and the general response was disbelief. When the celebrated coach of the Boston Celtics, Red Auerbach, heard of Gilovich and his study, he responded, quote, "Who is this guy? So he makes a study? I couldn't care less." Like most of the basketball stats nerd community, of which I sort of consider myself a member, although I was way deeper in the baseball and American football stats worlds, Kahneman has his own interpretation. The tendency to see patterns in randomness is overwhelming. Certainly more impressive than a guy making a study. Auerbach's response definitely falls on the curmudgeonly side. But despite the evidence presented by Tversky and his students, mainstream belief in the hot hand remained alive and well. The developers of NBA Jam certainly didn't look at the study and say, well, better scrap the fire mechanics since it's not real. The debate has continued in more or less the same fashion for the past 40 years. Statisticians insist that people are giving too much value to small data sets. Fans, players, and coaches insist that statisticians are downplaying the reality of something they've experienced throughout their whole lives. So it goes back and forth, while everybody spends a lot of time calling each other stupid in the process. There has got to be a better way to reconcile all this. And I think we already have it. In 2014, Andrew Boxcoxy, John Ezekowitz, and Carolyn Stein published a paper titled The Hot Hand, A New Approach to an Old Fallacy at MIT's Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. Their approach was fascinating. To me, it's one of the greatest examples to show that even if your mathematics and statistics work is sound, you can still miss the bigger picture if you aren't asking the right questions. Their abstract begins. The vast literature on the hot hand fallacy in basketball rests on the assumption that shot selection is independent of player perceived hot or coldness. Basically, Tversky's study and others like it only looked at one variable. Did the shot go in the basket or not? It's true, purely being told this guy made 5 shots in a row won't do a better job of telling you how he'll do on his next 5 shots than knowing his career shooting percentage. But to take that and say, therefore the hot hand isn't real, ignores a whole host of other things that can happen on the basketball court. The study presented at Sloan solves this problem by not just looking at shooting success, but also looking at shot selection. Part of NBA Jam's on-fire mechanic is that players like David Robinson and Patrick Ewing could hit shots they would never even attempt in a million years of NBA games. 2 decades later, the Sloan study would prove that the NBA Jam devs were kinda onto something, even if their version was a tiny bit exaggerated. The 2014 study's abstract continues. We create a comprehensive model of shot difficulty using relevant initial shot conditions. Here they include stuff you can get from box scores like shot distance and the type of shot. They mention stuff like fadeaway jumpers and reverse layups, as well as more complex information only available from laser camera systems set up in NBA arenas, which allowed them to even measure the number of defenders covering the shooters and how far away they were from the shooter. They take that model and use it to show that players who have exceeded their expectation over recent shots shoot from significantly further away, face tighter defense, and are more likely to take their team's next shot, and even take more difficult shots. So even if there isn't a statistically significant increase in shooting percentage, this study identifies that there is definitely something happening when a player gets hot. But that's not all. The abstract continues. We then turn to the hot hand itself and show that players who are outperforming will continue to do so, conditional on the difficulty of their present shot. our estimates of the hot hand effect range from 1.2 to 2.4 percentage points in increased likelihood of making a shot. So yes, Virginia, there is a hot hand. To be clear, I do think Gilovich, Valone, and Tversky had identified something real and valuable in the original study. Many people who watch sports, and a disturbing number of people who make decisions in sports, not to mention far more important aspects of our lives, are easily swayed by statistics despite sample sizes that are way too small to be significant. Most baseball fans know the experience of watching their manager send up a terrible hitter in a big spot because he was hitting hot, only for him to fail in an extremely predictable fashion. It is simply true that you shouldn't allow hot streaks to blind you to patterns shown over a full year or a full career's worth of performances. But the mistake is to end the inquiry there. Just because the hot hand isn't a particularly useful concept for somebody who wants to predict future performance doesn't mean it isn't real. It just shows up in a different way than the one we expected. NBA Jam rules because it leans into the stories we tell about basketball when we want the game to sound as magical as it feels. The fire mechanic and the way it represents the hot hand is just one of many ways that NBA Jam makes basketball feel as magical as it is in our heads. I'm an analytics guy. I think statistics are one of the most powerful storytelling tools we have in sports. I also think it's extremely satisfying to use numbers to prove when some blowhard is absolutely full of himself. That makes it easy to fall into the trap of treating stories like the hot hand like an enemy, but that's just tilting at windmills. Instead, I actually think us analytical types can stand to learn a thing or two from leaning into these stories in the same way NBA Jam does. That's why I think the approach from Bakskoksky, Ozikowicz, and Stein was so brilliant. They took the stories behind hot hand theory and used them as fuel for a new experimental approach, one that was able to show that the hot hand is more than the mass hallucination statisticians said it was for decades. I, for one, think it's beautiful that the same kind of creativity that leads to one of the coolest and most fun video games ever made can also help us make leaps forward in statistical understanding of the games we love. Thanks for watching. I'm Jackie Peanuts, this is the Jackie Peanuts Sports Machine, and I'm hoping to make lots more of these in the future. If that's something you think would be cool, click that subscribe button and like the video, and I'll be back with more soon.